Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Heartland Franchise Guide, your insider's guide to franchises in the Heartland area. I'm Blake Martin, your Heartland Franchise Guy host for today's podcast. We are your one-stop shop for all things franchising in the Heartland area. Education, resources, and advocacy for all of our local franchising field and for local entrepreneurs looking to learn more about this field in general. And if you're looking to learn more about this field, you're going to like this episode. Today, we're speaking with someone widely known as not just a franchising industry leader, but a true homegrown success story. We have with us today as our guest, Scooters Coffee's co-founder and small business advocate extraordinaire, Mr. Don Eckles. Don, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to join you. I think that's probably a slight exaggeration about the credentials, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'll lob in one more softball for you. Anybody ever told you that you have a voice made for podcasting? No, nobody's ever told me that, but I appreciate it. Well, thank you. And I do appreciate you joining us. Of course, when folks talk about franchising in this area anymore, particularly in recent years, Scooters Coffee is a brand that often comes up. So I'm really interested to talk to you a little bit about the history of the company and your background, how it all started. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with that point. You know, anymore, Scooters is ubiquitous in this area, right? We see your locations everywhere. But I'd be interested to hear, how did it all start? What was the motivation to start Scooters when you and Linda did that more than 20 years ago?
Yeah, I grew up in Omaha. Linda grew up in western Nebraska in Culbertson. And we had been kind of entrepreneurs most of our lives, mostly failed entrepreneurs. I was inexperienced at things, and so I tried this and tried that. And just over the years, you get better at things. But one of the things that I did that worked out fairly well was I worked for a company out of Chicago. It was a company no longer in business, but they were called JT's General Store, and it was a route sales business. But it was a route sales business that was owned by the folks that ran the routes, kind of like you see the Snap-on tool guys or you see lots of route sales guys, the potato chip guys. They own their own routes, and that was kind of that type of deal. That company eventually went broke, but they had transferred me to California, and I was working for them out there, and they'd gone broke. So I got into the coffee business kind of by mistake. I meant to get into the ice cream and popcorn business, and a friend suggested that I get into coffee as well. This was in 1991. So we got into the coffee, ice cream, and popcorn business. We started a store in Folsom, California, and we called it Sweet Things in Java. It was very early on in the coffee business. In fact, I tell people all the time, in 1991, there were 162 Starbucks in the country, and we thought at that time, holy cow, 162 stores, who are these guys?
That's perspective.
So it was pretty early on. What happened, to kind of cut to the chase a little bit, is my daughters graduated from high school, and we were wanting to come back to Omaha. So I had pulled into a guy who was building a little drive-through something or other in North Sacramento, and I stopped and visited with that guy one day, and he told me he was building a drive-through coffee place with a little double-sided window on each side. And I went back home that night and told Linda, I said, this guy's onto something. And so I'd sit across the street from that guy's place and just watch the cars go in and out. And so we came back when the girls graduated from high school. We came back to Omaha and started Scooters with the idea of Scooters. The customers are Scooters, scoot in and scoot out. We came back with the idea of drive-through coffee, and that was in 1997. So that's how we came back or came up with the idea, and that's how we got started.
That is a really interesting story. So you literally sat outside of this drive-through coffee business's location and studied what was happening.
Yeah, there were a few drive-through coffee places popping up out in California at the time. There were a couple of companies that no longer exist. But it was a lot of mom and pop businesses back in those days too, not just the drive-thrus, but again, there were 162 Starbucks. So pretty much everybody else was a mom and pop shop. And, so there were a lot of those things, and nobody was really all that good at it. But my wife and I, in our store, I ran the store, and she did deliveries from the store. So businesses would call in, and my wife would, drag around a basket of muffins and cinnamon rolls and pots of coffee. And she, people would call in orders, and she'd go out and do deliveries. And that's, we scratched out a living. And, I started watching that guy, and it's like cars are coming into him, and his wife isn't dragging a basket of muffins around. And so it's like, this guy's got it going. So, that's kind of how we came up with the idea. And we just knew that specialty coffee was not really, it just really wasn't prevalent at all in the Midwest. And so we felt like it was a real opportunity to come back and try some things here.
Well, and not only was it not very prevalent here at the time, but if I'm understanding correctly from prior conversations, certainly the idea of doing it with a drive-through format made you even more unique, which leads me to another. I mean, you could say that you were trailblazing in a way in the industry, whether you knew how you were going to grow or not. But when you're trailblazing like that, typically organizations, franchises and non, take a few lumps along the way. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Did you take a few lumps in the learning process?
Oh, yeah, no, we took some lumps. I think you're exactly right, because, again, back in those days, when we opened the first scooters, 24th and Cornhusker in Bellevue, was in early 1998. And there was one other drive-through coffee place, and that was Crane. I know there were two. There was a place called Cappuccino, etc. at One Pacific Place, and they went out of business a long time ago. That place is now a Scooter's Coffee. And, in fact, all the Crane stores are now Scooter's Coffee, too. But back in those days, there was a Crane store at 78th and Cass, and then they were in the process of building one at 129th and Maple, and then there was that Cappuccino, etc. at One Pacific Place. So that was really all that there was, and there was none of that when we first started working on permitting back in Omaha. But by the time we got here, those things were going. So it was like, that was a little disappointing. Like, we thought we were going to come back and corner the market on drive-through coffee, and all of a sudden there are a couple of other competitors. And kind of funny, the guy that started Crane, name was Steve Hamilton. Steve passed away several years ago, but he was kind of my competitor back in those days. And it was kind of funny because we had a store and he'd have two, and then we'd have two and he'd have four, and we'd have three and he'd have six. And it's like, what the heck, And but we just competed with each other. Steve and Paulette were good folks, and we just competed with each other for locations and trying to figure out the business too. We both made dumb decisions on locations lots of times, and you kind of had to figure things out as you went along. And eventually, as we refined the model, we figured out what worked and what didn't. But my point about that was that when we came back, Starbucks wasn't doing drive-through coffee, except occasionally they'd stumble into a place that had a drive-through. And their whole shtick at that point, if you remember, was Starbucks was the third place. It was home, work, and Starbucks. Yes. And drive-through coffee did not work with the whole concept of the third place. They wanted people to come into their stores and stay. So our deal was not that we had some genius idea. Our deal was there are plenty of places to get coffee in the country, and so if we want to have people come to us, we felt like we needed to offer something different than what everybody else offered. And for us, it was going to be about higher quality drinks. We were going to use the highest quality stuff on the market, and we were going to do all drive-through. It was all about drive-through. Our focus is drive-through. We tell people all the time, we build drive-through kiosks, and occasionally we attach a coffee house to them, but it's all about drive-through. And then amazing customer service. So we trademarked a slogan 15 years ago for it is amazing people, amazing drinks, amazingly fast. And that's what we focus on as our approach. And I say that only because that was kind of the model back in those days. And that was a challenge. Imagine going to a bank in 1998 and asking to borrow money to build a drive-through coffee kiosk in somebody's parking lot in Omaha, Nebraska, and sell $3 cups of coffee. They looked at you like you were from Mars, or, talk to a landlord about leasing you space, and he'd think, you're going to go broke and he's going to be stuck with your dumb little building in his place. And So that was the challenge that we had back in those days. And then, of course, McDonald's got into the drive-through coffee business at that point, too, with their McCafes. I think that was in about 2000. Maybe it was 1999, but it was about that same time. So the competition got fairly stiff, and we just had to keep working at getting better and better at it and figuring out, what our niche was and keep focusing on that.
Well, that was that really resonated with me at the end there. You stuck with it. You had a belief in having that unique differentiator, and clearly you were not dissuaded from that.
Right. Well, look, I say to people all the time, and I say this with humility, but, people always, they kind of make fun of McDonald's and they say, hamburgers aren't that great and this and that and the other thing. And it's like, I look at that and I say, are you kidding? They have a decent hamburger and their lines are longer at lunchtime than anybody else's. So whatever they've got going well. And I look at Starbucks the same way. People say, well, they're not this and they're not that. Starbucks is good at this, and they've got a lot of stores. And if everybody wanted, if it was just about a cup of coffee, there's plenty of places to get them. So what we figured, what we staked our thought process on is that we don't have to beat anybody else to win. All we have to do is know what our race is and run our race and run it as well as we can possibly run it. And for us, we think it's going to be about location. It's going to be about high quality drinks. It's going to be about the customer service. It's going to be about the speed of that service. And focus on those things. And if we focus on those things and we hire to those things and we bring franchisees in that understand those things, that's the race that we run. And as long as we keep running our race, we generally do pretty well. It's when we get off track and start thinking we have to beat everybody else at their race that we start, making mistakes.
That's a great point. And you kind of segued into a question I wanted to ask anyways, Don, and that's just about the idea of having gone through those lumps and the experiences that you learned. I heard you say that you and your competitor made some dumb decisions early on, like all of us business owners do. But we also talk about in franchising, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, right?
Yeah, right.
So what would you say to folks as far as what do the franchise owners within scooters in the year 2020, what do they gain from the lumps that you took, from what you've learned over these years?
Well, I think that we've just been so fortunate, honestly. I just say this with humility because I don't want to pretend that we have it all figured out, but we're doing really well. And our franchise owners are very happy. We don't have, that I know of today, we don't have a single store for sale in our system. And we really don't have on a regular basis. People really like their business. They want to expand their business. But I think that the point that you're trying to get to is what they gain from the experience is a deep sense of commitment from their franchisor that people have invested a lot of money. And I tell people all the time when we bring them in for, we call it the Amazing Day. Some folks call it Discovery Day. But when we bring people in for Be Amazing Day, and now we do virtual Be Amazing Days because of the pandemic, but when we bring people in, we tell people all the time, Linda and I used to, we'd lie in bed and talk about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to have 6 or 7 stores, and I'm going to roast coffee, and I'll drive a little forklift, and, how cool that's all going to be. And all of those fantasies about what we were going to do, none of them ever included losing our investment or having our kids not be able to go to college or us losing our house. And we remember that. We know that everybody else is in the same way. They're excited about what they're going to do. And the idea of losing all of their money or cashing in their 401k and going through, that does not enter into their thought process. So we take very seriously our responsibility to make it work for people. And so we focus very hard on the location and making sure that we know what we're looking for and that we find the right spot and that we recruit the right franchisees to work in our system that get what we do and get how our model works. I tell people all the time, when we talk about franchise things, that if you don't understand the magic of our business, you don't understand the loyalty nature of the coffee business or why people come to us instead of somebody else, then it's just a transaction. And if it's just a transaction, you better hope a better transaction doesn't come along down the street. So we have to understand what it is that works in our business, and we have to really buy into that. And if we don't buy into it, then, we might do fine, we might not. But if we do buy into it and we just keep focusing on the right things all the time, it's pretty hard to not do well in this business. But a lot of people don't do well. Not in the scooters business. We do pretty well pretty much across the board. But coffee's hard. It's a loyalty business. People love their coffee place. They drink coffee every day, and we've got to get it right. We've got to understand there's got to be a reason that people come to us instead of somebody else. And there's got to be a reason that somebody would get out of someone else's line and get into our line. And if we can't give them that reason, then we might not get them. So that's what we focus on.
Yeah. I can hear in your voice how serious you are about that, how passionate you are about it.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think that's the thing that we tell people is it's going to work. It's likely going to work out very well as long as we all have the right understanding about how this business works and why it works, and we all agree with that, and we focus on that and work on it. And then we've got, great marketing folks, they do their thing, and we've got great real estate folks, and they do their thing. But at the end of the day, all of that stuff is just trying to put the right pieces in place. But still, you have to smile at that customer, and you have to make a great drink, and you have to get them in and out quickly, and they have to matter to you, and you have to matter to them. And if we can get to that point, we have a very strong chance of winning. So that's what we do on a day in and day out basis.
What made you decide? What made you choose the franchising model for your growth?
Well, I think that one of the things that you asked a little bit ago about some of the mistakes that you make early on, and I think a lot of franchisors make this mistake, probably even most. I think there's probably one that they make that we tried not to make. I think the biggest mistake a lot of franchisors make is they start franchising before they have a viable model.
Indeed.
Because the idea of having other people do the stuff and you just sit around and dictate from on high, that sounds fairly appealing, but that's not really the way it works. And so what I find is that a lot of franchisors don't make it, or they don't have a good franchise opportunity because they really haven't vetted the opportunity. They haven't even proven that the model is viable and that people can make a living at it, and that it's a growth model, and that you can do some things. But having said that, let's just assume that you don't do that, then I think this is where I started to say this is one of the mistakes we made, and I think probably most do. And that is, originally, the people who want to buy franchises are people who have seen you doing it and say, I want to have one of those.
Right.
And so it's like people buying jobs. It's customers maybe that are coming through and say, I'd love to own one of these things. Or it's family members who see that you're liking your business and they want to own one too. And so, that's kind of the way we started off franchising. And the idea of that was that, again, we believed so seriously in the customer experience and making sure that it was a special deal and not just a transaction. Our feeling was that by having franchise owners instead of a bunch of employees, that the franchise owners would care as much about the business as we do, and that they would then take responsibility in each of those individual stores to make sure that customer experience is just amazing. That isn't always the case. And so this is where the mistake came in. You basically find that you're selling jobs to people at that point. People are buying a business and they love it, but, some people are like putting their family photos up in their store, and they're putting doilies on the countertops, and, they bring in flowers and do this and do that. And it's like, you have no real model. It's just everybody selling the same coffee, and you've got the same sign on the building outside, but you really don't have a model. And as time goes on and you realize, no, we've got a serious business opportunity here, but we've got to get better at this, then maybe the pendulum swings back the other way. And what we started doing then is maybe looking for business people that had some business savvy, and said, okay, we need people that understand how business works, not people who are just buying jobs. And so that pendulum kind of swings back the other direction. And then you're bringing in people that don't really get the magic or the heart of the business. It's just it's a bunch of transactions to them. That's what they look at.
Right.
And then it I think, towards the middle, and you get to a point, if you keep working at it and getting better at it, where you say, no, you've got to find people that really understand the magic of this business, that really love this business and get it, that are sophisticated enough to run a business and understand how profit works and that sort of thing. But we can teach people how to, how to do the books. We can teach people how to pull espresso shots and texturize milk. That's stuff that you can teach people. But you've got to have people that really get it and love it and look at it and say, man, this is the way I want to make my living. And if you have that, and there's this love for the whole concept of what we do in the coffee business, then I think that's where you start getting into a good spot. And then from that, over the years, we've gotten to the point now where, people want to buy 10 or 20 or so store deals. But again, they're business people that get our model and do that well. And a lot of our bigger franchisees are actually people who have been franchisees for 10 or 15 years that have just over the years accumulated a lot of stores. So
Sure.
it's kind of that. But we've gotten to a point where we've really refined our model, and we're really specific about who we bring in and who we don't bring in.
Well, and that brings us to the end of our time here, but I think what you just said at the end kind of answers the last question I was going to ask you, and that was all about, what should people know who are looking to research and join Scooter's franchise as a franchise owner? And if I'm hearing you correctly, it's you can't train the love of the business into people.
Right. I think that you have to really, this is a business that you have to be kind of passionate about. It's a fun business, honestly. I just am hopelessly in love with this business, but it's a fun business because people are coming in and they choose to come in, and they come in. Our average customer comes in 3.5 times a week. I mean, how many businesses are like that? Nobody buys pizza 3.5 times a week or hamburgers 3.5 times a week or steak, but they do coffee. Some customers come in every day. Some come in twice a day, but our average
I'm one of those.
comes in 3.5 times a week. And so, that's something you've just got to be really excited about and love. And then you have to understand people aren't coming to Scooters. They're stopping at Scooters on their way to someplace. So we've got to be respectful of their time. One of the big lessons I learned early on was a guy named Chuck Williams. I just saw him the other day because we did our very first store. We tore it down and rebuilt it, and he came down for a rebrand opening. And I was reminding Chuck that very early on when we started the business, and we were struggling, to try to, get customers in and that sort of thing. And Chuck came by one afternoon and he said, "Man, you guys are getting busy." He said, "You were so busy today, I couldn't even stop." And he thought he was complimenting me, and it was just like a dagger to my heart because I thought, oh my gosh, how many people are looking over and seeing the line and saying, "I can't stop today." So that was one of those lessons that was really good for us because we learned that line, we better be moving that line. If our customers can trust that they can get in behind 10 cars and they'll get out of there in 4 or 5 minutes, they'll get in that line all day long. But if we hold them in line for 10 or 15 minutes, they just won't do that again. Right. They'll wait until there's just no cars. See, it's just all those things and being good at it and focusing on it, and that has to matter to you. And if it matters to you, and you focus on getting better all the time, then this is a great business. But if that stuff doesn't matter, I tell people all the time, just go buy a Burger King or a Wendy's, and because those are good businesses too. But what we do, we have to get it right. There's too much competition.
Well, I think that sums it up very well. It sums up what your business is all about, your leadership, and why the business has grown. Don, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today and provide some education about Scooters and generally about franchising with us today. So thank you so much for sharing the Scooters Coffee franchise story with us today.
Yeah, glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time, Don. We're out of time for today's episode with the Heartland Franchise Guide. If you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us at theheartlandfranchiseguy.com. That's heartlandfranchiseguy.com. Once again, we'd like to thank our guest today, Don Eckles, co-founder of Scooters Coffee Franchise. Appreciate all of you joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
A Hurrdat Media Production.